It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Thursday, June 6th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is looking back at the year that was from a management perspective and ahead to the draft combine.
Now you made me think of that "Don't Look Back" song by Boston.
Your Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You can find our show over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So yesterday we talked about the year that was from a big picture off ice perspective related to this new era of orange that the Flyers had declared last off season. And yesterday, Dan Hilferty, the Flyers CEO, and Keith Jones, team president, had their end of year press conference to discuss that very topic. And I thought it was really interesting. They looked at things in some ways in a different way than we were talking about yesterday, but answered several of our questions as well. But what was your big picture takeaway from that presser?
Yeah, my big picture takeaway is they're willing to answer anything, which is good. It's not like they were like, well, they weren't hedging their bets. They weren't like this is off limits. They weren't. No, they're really open about everything, and I think for the most part they sent the right message that hey, there's still work to do. They're doing it, and this is what we're doing, and I think fans feel good about that.
Yeah, I think, it is fair to say that for sure. I think that they are continuing the messaging of trying to be reasonable about expectations from year to year. I think
Hmm.
that's really important to them and to very clearly define that even though this season went way better than a lot of people expected, what they gained from it was so valuable, but that next year could look different and they could take a step backwards. They mentioned the New Jersey Devils having done so this year. As teams in a rebuild often do in terms of the wins and losses, but still make progress in other ways, and that they define success in on multiple fronts. And it's from the fan interactions, from the ticket sales, but also from a player development perspective. And that's how they look at the on ice product is are the draft picks making progress when they join the organization.
Right now, I will tell you, um, I don't put the same credence when Dan and Keith talk about players and player development as I would if it was the actual staff with Danny and everything else. This is more like, hey, we like these guys. This is what we like. It's like it's nothing that I would put down in concrete. I would say that I was impressed that Dan went to 60 games because certainly with a busy schedule of being in the position he's in, that's a lot. I
Mhm.
don't think we've seen anybody travel like that many games. So that was impressive.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think Dan would be the first guy to tell you, as he has said many times, he looks at the hockey as a fan that he's learning from being around these guys.
Right,
But
right.
he leaves that to the people that know better than he does. So I think it's important that he does continue that messaging. Despite the fact that I do think he's gotten a little smarter about the hockey as this season has gone in terms of hearing what he said over the year. I think that it was interesting that Keith Jones was asked specifically what his job was.
Hmm.
And he mentioned helping break down the walls between the business and the hockey side, which is very important. But he did not say much beyond that. And that's what I thought was interesting. It's like, it's still not clear to me what his job is, other than being a very charming guy, which he is, and being a good face for the team.
Right. That's really supposed to be about 50% of the job. The other
Hmm.
50 is really supposed to be a business oriented part of the job, and it's more than just handshaking. So at some point, you hope that he would jump into that part of it. And look,
And
I
maybe
know,
he has, and he didn't know how to talk about it, but
well, you think he
he
would
did
at
not
this
mention
point.
it.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is because that's how it is around the league. Now, Comcast's
Hmm.
a big organization, and they may say, "Well, we have a
Sure.
person for that." But if I was in that position, that's the way I would sort of have to handle it. Like, I got to start giving my input on that. I remember Paul Holmgren said when he took that position, he was going to start learning about the other side of the business. We're not sure that's happening right this minute. To be fair.
Yeah. One thing though, yesterday we talked about, how do they know what they know about what the fans are thinking right
Hmm.
now? And we mentioned specifically maybe they need to talk to more non-season ticket holders beyond the town halls that they have. They did mention that specifically in terms of what's their data sources. So they know based on the money side of things that ticket sales are
Right.
up. They've gotten 92 to 95% renewals. They've got more conversation with sponsors, more suite purchases. They've done studies. So I thought that was fantastic that they mentioned some methodology, because you have to have some methodology behind what you're saying.
You do, and that's really good. I mean, me, because I'm a reporter, it's like, well, if I hear that you got 92, 93%, and I know the house isn't sold out, what is that percentage compared to 2 years ago? Like, what is it? What percentage of the building is full now
Hmm.
compared to 2 years ago? Because it's still not
Oh,
full.
that's not the percent that's full. That's the percent of season ticket holders that are
No, I
renewing.
know, but how many? Well, okay, I shouldn't say full. How many season ticket holders did you have 2 years ago compared to now, where you have
Mm.
92, 93% renewal? That's what I really mean. And that would be an interesting number to get. We don't have it, so it's okay. But I'm just saying that's something I would dig into and be curious about, because again, we in the media, we used to hear the sellout song a lot. I can't tell you the last time I heard the sellout song for a Flyers game. It's been many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, they did sell out a few games that I remember them mentioning it specifically, but I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, and they certainly didn't bring them up. So there is a point to be
No.
made
Yeah.
there. I think, the other big elephant in the room, which they did address, was the stadium issue and dealing with the Sixers and all of that. That the Sixers, of course, are locked into their lease until 2031. The
So
Flyers
far.
do have, right. That's where they are right now.
No,
And that
I know,
beyond that,
but I think we all have watched enough sports and have been through sports enough to know
sure.
that teams can get out of these agreements.
Sure, but that is what we know now. They
Uh-huh.
have an actual agreement with the Phillies, which we knew about, dealing
Right.
with the sports complex as a whole. There's going to be some announcements over the course of the summer on what's going on with those plans and when construction may or may not start and the timing for all of that. He did mention they're talking to the Eagles as well as being part of that conversation. So I think that is an important note, that there isn't an official relationship there on this front, but that is something that they're looking toward. Uh, I thought it was interesting that he framed it as, this debate about what to do is good for Philadelphia in the grand scheme of things, in terms of nobody wants to leave the town. Nobody's talking
Right.
about threats to
Right.
leave Philadelphia, and that it's a healthy debate to have in terms of what makes sense for the sports teams and location in the city.
I think that's all good, but I think the problem here is, and I don't want to overstep my bounds, but I feel like the Flyers have a really good handle on business as far as Comcast is in general and what they've done with upgrades and everything else compared to the Eagles. The Eagles are a money making institution because they're the NFL and they make tons of money. I can't tell you
Right.
that the Eagles are, because if they had to start over again, I'm not sure they would have the same results as what I see the Flyers maybe having. So like they're going to probably want the biggest seat at the table or not do it. And I think they're going to be hard to negotiate with. That's my sense.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's, they are Philadelphia sports in a lot of ways. And so I think that is a huge factor there. But Dan seems to be optimistic about the future on this front. Time will tell, and we will stay tuned for that. I think one of the other things, going back to the Flyers side of things, one thing that was important that they talked about that Keith Jones mentioned specifically was the dead cap space on the team, and acknowledged it, and that it is a very difficult needle to thread last year and this upcoming year, but there is a blueprint to do it right, and they're going to try and get it right.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously that's out of his domain and gets more into,
Mhm.
Barry Hanrahan and Danny and the rest of those guys. It's hard. It's hard to dig out from it without having to get like, we'll talk about it on future shows. Like if you want to move some players, what else are you willing to eat? Or you have to find someone that could take a whole contract, but then you're not getting nearly as good a deal if that happens. Because even though the cap's going up, I mean, everybody's still going to spend it all. Like it's just that's the way this league is.
Yeah, I think all of that is important. And I think that it is going to be, a very difficult task for them to manage it, both from the messaging side of things, from keeping the players happy, from keeping the fans happy, and to have the room to bring in that key free agent 2, 3 years down the road that they need to cap off this rebuild. They also did mention Matvei Michkov. They were asked about him, towed the party line. There's no update. We'll welcome him now. We'll welcome him in 2 years, whenever that may be. Flyers have no control, and that's what we're saying about it.
Seems a little less optimistic, right? Like as the summer draws
I
on,
don't think
moves
they were
on.
painting it as optimistic or pessimistic. It's just, it is what it is, and we'll
Well,
take them when we get.
I'm gonna say this. I feel like there would have been a little bit more move into, yeah, there's chats or we're looking into it or whatever if they were actually close. I don't think they're as close as maybe they were a month or two ago until all this other stuff started to happen and, different messaging came out from Russia. So that's just my take. That's why I think they've just taken this original view like, hey, if he's here in 2 years, he's here in 2 years. But I do feel like there was more than that happening behind the scenes that now is cooled off.
Well, we'll see what happens there. Good to hear from management from the Flyers, of course. The draft combine is coming up this weekend. Russ will be there in person, and we're going to talk about what it all means and some players and what they could show at the combine specifically, coming up next. The NBA and NHL playoffs are in the home stretch. It would be incredible to be there in person. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting those tickets even faster and easier, so you can make that dream come true. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. With killer last minute deals, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying those coveted NBA playoff seats, MLB tickets in your town, and more. My favorite part of the app is that it's great for getting notified about last minute flash deals, and they let you save even more with zone deals where you pick the section and let Game Time choose the seat for you. Best of all, they have all in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, and your tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through email. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, Russ, we did talk about this last year, but many of you may not have been around in our listener base last year, and or just need a refresher. So, what is the purpose of the NHL Draft Combine?
The biggest purpose, honestly, are the interviews. The interviews, this is the last time teams will really get a chance to have a big sit down with a player. They've been talking all year, and players, when I do my interviews with them, they tell me they've been talking to teams, but they also acknowledge that it's the last time, right? And so like G Bouillem was really cognizant of that and was even smart enough at his age to say that the interview is probably going to matter more than what he does with the floor exercises. And so that's a big thing because again, teams, this is a whole exercise in mental toughness and mental acuity. So, as an example, sometimes Detroit will have Steve Eiserman in the room. Most of the time, they don't, though. I don't think he goes anymore, but I think he did early on. So like if a player sees Steve Eiserman, it's like, oh, that's, how are they going to react? How are they going to answer his questions? Right. But if he's not there, then it's a different feeling. Sometimes teams do bring in somebody who has that kind of gravitas, but a lot of times there's 3 or 4 people in the room with that one player. And so, they can't be overwhelmed. It's no longer on Zoom. And you have to, it's like a job interview, except for a really high paying job.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about it to me is that you look at, the physical tests get a lot of the play because of, who does that wind
Because we're
sprint.
visual, we could see
You
that.
right.
I could show you a
Who can
video.
jump the highest, the
Right.
farthest, like all of that stuff. Just stuff like that is very shiny. And we don't
Yes.
see those interviews, right? All we hear is from,
No, we don't see them.
media members like you ask them, who did you talk to? How did it go?
Right.
And
Right.
we get this like whisper down the lane thing. So the interviews are a very kind of cagey process in a
It
lot of
is.
ways. And I think that, I think about just even as a non-athlete applying for jobs and you have like 4 rounds of interviews and it's very stressful and you have to prepare for them. You have to have set answers to certain questions, but you also want to seem like you can be casual and fun. And so, like, there's, I think, some of those same pressures on these guys, right?
Right. And players are preparing for the combine. I just interviewed Adam Jecho, and he said that he's been with a lot of teams, like even with the Chechen team right up until a few weeks ago, as far as like having a camp with them. So these guys stay on the ice longer than sometimes we think. And but he also acknowledges that, hey, this is a way to really get his name out there because he'll talk to the media. A lot of people have not spoken to him. Uh, and so this will be an opportunity to really kind of get his message out there, people to see his personality. He's also, a guy that's 6'5", 200. So we'll see how strong he is now. I mean, one of the things that I look at when I see a player, and I'm going to give an example. So I looked at Noah Dobson, and I remember seeing him at the Top Prospects game. And I was like, man, and I saw him I think, I did see him, I think, out of uniform. I think I saw him in a practice something. So you could really see like where his shoulders were at. And when he went into the draft, he was 178 pounds. And I figured, this guy can get close to 200. He's 194 now. And now at 194, he's pretty close to that Norris kind of guy that I thought he could be, right? And Quinn Hughes really hasn't put on much muscle, but Quinn Hughes is even better than what I thought he was. And I thought he was a generational player. And I put Dobson just ahead of Quinn Hughes. And in the end, it might end up being really good that it is that way, or Hughes will just be
Right.
better and he's just an anomaly, right? But the point is that you look at these guys and you look and you see how frail or how much muscle they could put on. You look and see, and again, we're not talking about the no pull ups like Sam Bennett. That doesn't really translate to much in hockey. And Sam Bennett beats up people pretty good right now, right? So nobody talks about
Yeah.
that. But the core stuff is what you talk about. Like, Mackenzie Blackwood really did get helped showing his core strength because as a goalie, it's important. And so those kinds of things, you could look at a foundation of a player, meaning down below what the core strength could be, the legs, those things. We see these guys in shorts. You could see some of these things. Some guys may have chicken legs like I do. And that's something and a lot of these exercises mimic what you could do skating. When you're doing a vertical leap, it does translate into like speed burst. So those kinds of things do translate. So teams do look at that, and that's why they still do those exercises because a lot of them are just to see, hey, is there a little bit more to this guy? Like this guy's strength's not all that could be. We feel like, he's pretty good. They may look at somebody and say, wow, look at this kid. He may be maxed out here. Like this is it. He's already like a man. He's already fully developed. He's already, you know, killing on all these exercises, but the ceiling's not there. That's a
Right.
way to tell those kinds of things.
Do you think that, somebody just having a particularly standout performance in these physical tests could get somebody an interview with a team that may not have been pre-scheduled?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I do think that, but it probably would be after, the whole day is over. They probably would try and get a hold of him before he goes home, because you wouldn't know it that day. Everything's set up ahead of time, so you wouldn't be able to do
Right.
it that day. But you certainly could do it still before the draft. And I think someone like, because again, I do want to point out, not everybody gets invited to the combine,
Yes.
and
So
even though it's 100 players or more, there are players that
mhm.
don't get invited.
Yeah, I think that is also interesting to see, like, who gets invited and who doesn't, or who can attend and who can't. Some of the European
Visa
players,
problems, yeah,
yeah, may not be able to make it for whatever reason, and so you don't really get to see them in comparison to the other players. And I think that the guys, at least in my opinion, that can make a huge impact here are like your second, third rounders that are in
yes,
this batch of players, because they could make a name for themselves where people just aren't generally talking about them, and you just have like your draft experts like you, Russ, talking about them, or who know a lot about them. And I think
yeah.
it could open a lot of people's eyes and change somebody's fortunes. There are a few guys that we are going to talk about along the line, and we are going to get to that coming up next. All right. So, Russ, there were three guys that will be at the combine this weekend that are late first round through third round kind of range. Adam Jecho was the first one that you wanted to talk about. Like, why did you want to talk about him? What do you think he'll bring to the combine? And then, why would he be attractive to the Flyers?
Okay, so I knew I was getting an exclusive with them, so I felt like let me, really test this out. And so he's already there, right? Players are already there. We start
Mhm.
showing up around Thursday, but rights holders are there taping pre-taped interviews, and like NHL.com gets exclusivity and can talk to whoever they want ahead of time. Those kinds of things going on. But because I have a lot of connections, I could still get some primo interviews like this, and I think he could end up being like a really important second rounder. Uh, so I look at him because here's the one thing I will say about him, that after talking to him and watching more film and everything else, yeah, he's got to fill out. There's no question. He's 6'5". The interesting thing is, I think he could play center. I do. He's not listed as a center right now, but I've seen him with faceoffs. The last time I looked on like Instat, it was like 45%. He thinks he, can get better. He's pretty confident on faceoffs, but I've seen the way he goes down the ice and can sort of help out his teammates. And sometimes he helps his teammates too much because he's too selfless, and that's also the mind of a center. And just imagine
Yeah,
if he
and
could turn.
he plays on the Edmonton Oil Kings in the
Yes.
WHL currently.
Yeah. So imagine if down the line, if you start having him play center next year, you draft him. Let's say you're the Flyers, you have him start playing center next year. Imagine down the line, you could have a 6'5" center. That's a pretty intriguing possibility there.
Right, I think his size is something that is extremely appealing to the Flyers. He had 47 points in 54 games, with the Oil Kings this past year, and was on the Czech, U18 team,
Yeah.
and had a pretty good tournament there with 11 points in
Oh yeah.
18 games.
He was good.
So a real good showing. Sorry, that was his all international
Yes,
totals, but
that's his
he had
totals, but that's still good totals. Yeah.
yeah, 3 points in 5 games in the U18 Worlds. So,
Yes.
I think, he's a guy that would be attractive to the Flyers. Again, you are right, he has to put on muscle because he only weighs 200 pounds. For a 6'5" guy, that's not filled out yet.
And he knows that. Like, he's working on those things. But like I said, he's got the mind of a center. And I just think, wow, if he could be like a third line center with that size, that's teams dream about that, man.
Alright, who else did you wanna talk about who'll be at the Combine?
Uh, well, I'm assuming these other guys will be there. We could talk about Terik Parascak. He's been a guy that's been gaining a lot of steam. He had over 100 points. Another guy from the Dub, right? We like those
Prince
WHL.
George.
Yeah, we like the Dub guys. But there's some knocks on his defense, and he's is he 5'10"? Is he 5'11"? We'll find out that day, because there are some draft nicks that literally will stand by the guys with their heights and weights as it's being done and report it on Twitter. And I'm that
Yeah,
idiot that will
he's
search for that.
on the combine listing. I kid you not, he's listed at 5'11" and 3/4, which
Yeah,
is
that's what I'm
like,
saying.
come
Just
on.
stop.
Like,
Let's see what he really is.
yeah, yeah.
That's what I want to see. So that's one of the things with him. I want to see what he really is. I do want to see him a little bit, how strong he is. Uh, like I said, he scored a whole bunch of points. Uh, I was told by another
105.
yeah, I was told
105.
yeah, I was told by another scout that he reminds him a little bit of Andrew Cristal, who went to the Capitals.
Mhm.
So I said, okay, because he's seen more, a lot, much more than him that I have. And so, yeah, if you could get him, if he doesn't turn into a first rounder, and he's around in the second round, which is possible. It's not probable, but possible. Keep your eye on him.
Yeah, and some people have him going in the late first round, and the Flyers certainly have one of those picks. And
They do.
and if they wind up going with a defenseman with the first pick, he could be an attractive option for that
Yes.
later pick
Yep.
in the first round for sure. I think so. Kamil Bednarik is another person who will be at the combine, who is a New Jersey kid, U.S. national team kid. We love those, and played on the U18s there, and he's going to BU next year. So really good pedigree there.
Yeah, those things all track well. He kept getting better and better as the season went on. He's like your typical, he's really good at everything. I don't think he's great at anything. So that's where I think he becomes like, somewhere in the middle to late second, maybe even early third. And this is a guy who I do believe is a centerman. And so it's like, again, he's another one of these guys where, yeah, you got to have to wait a while. He'll probably go 3 years at college. Maybe he goes two if he's exceptional and he really starts to push it. But there's a lot to like. I mean, he's 6 foot 185 now. That's pretty good. He did play on all the right teams, like even on the New Jersey Rockets team uh back in the
Hmm.
day, 21, 22. That's a really good team. A lot of good players have come out of there. So I do like that. And I just feel like the Flyers, like, if you're looking for that sort of like Noah Cates kind of guy, I think he could fill that role. And I think you need those guys. And so it all depends where he goes. I think it's really super important to see if he's around when they have, multiple picks. So because they have what, two in the second?
Just one.
Oh, just one in the second. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that
but they
one,
have a third rounder as well.
they
So
had the third rounder, right? So that's the thing. You've
mhm.
got to decide, if he's not taken where you're coming up in the second, do you roll the dice and wait for him in the third and try and get some real value there, which they might want to do.
Yeah, I think so. It seems like he has a lot of promise, and coming from the national team development program, definitely has a good sense of what he needs to do to get better. Because that
Yeah.
program, like the progression with these kids, is generally very good, and they all know how to hone their skills in the best way possible. And then going to BU is only going to help that further.
Yeah, he's played in all these tournaments. The amount of great coaching that he's gotten from guys, is invaluable. And so, yeah, so he could be a real, diamond in the rough here to kind of look at down, later, a little later in the draft, in like the late second, early third.
Yeah, so we will keep an eye on these three. We will add them to our spreadsheet of guys we have covered leading up to the NHL draft. The link to that is in the show notes, and you can look at any of the prospect profiles we've done for draft eligible guys leading up to the draft there. On tomorrow's show, we will give our Stanley Cup preview as well as the weekly poll results. We talked at the beginning of the week about who could potentially crack the lineup next year. We'll figure out what you had to say on tomorrow's show as well. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So send in those mailbag questions via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great day, everyone.